The deck is heaving 6 feet under your boots, salt spray mixing with aviation gasoline in the air thick enough to taste, and somewhere in the chaos of 37 aircraft, for 100 men, and 45 minutes to get every single plane airborne, a kid from Ohio is about to make a mistake that could kill 12 people. But he doesn't. Not today. Because 6 months ago, none of this worked. 6 months ago, launching a full strike meant blood on the deck, twisted metal in the catapult track, and prayers that the fire party could reach the blaze before it reached the bomb bay. Then everything changed. The training changed. The choreography changed. The survival rate tripled. And if you've ever wondered how ordinary sailors learn to dance with death at 200 knots in the middle of the Pacific, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story has never been told the way it needs to be, through the eyes of the men who lived it, the sweat and fear and split-second decisions that turned carrier decks from slaughterhouses into the most precisely orchestrated killing machines the world had ever seen. January 1944. Pearl Harbor. The air station on Ford Island where they're running the Advanced Carrier Training Group, and 19-year-old Joe Maloney from Pittsburgh stands on a simulated flight deck painted on concrete, watching a chief petty officer with a clipboard and a whistle demonstrate something that looks like a cross between semaphore and a prize fight. The chief's arms snap through positions, each movement sharp, deliberate, exaggerated. This is the new way. Standardized hand signals. Every carrier in the Pacific Fleet will use the same gestures, the same sequence, the same muscle memory, so that when you rotate ships or get reassigned or find yourself on a strange deck in the middle of a typhoon, your hands know what to do even if your brain is screaming. Maloney is a plane captain responsible for a single Hellcat, and before this training, he learned his job from a guy who learned it from a guy who made it up as he went along in 1942 when carriers were rare and procedures were whatever kept you alive until tomorrow. Now there's a manual, a checklist, a sequence that must be followed in the exact order or you don't get to the next step. The chief explains it with the patience of a man who's seen what happens when you skip steps. You check the tie-down chains, the chocks, the control surfaces, the tires, the tail hook, the arresting cable, every single item, and you make eye contact with the yellow shirt director when you're done, and you give the thumbs up only when you mean it, because that thumbs up is a contract, a promise that this aircraft is ready to put a pilot's life on the line. They drill it for 8 hours. Then they drill it again. Then they do it in the dark. Then they do it with smoke machines pumping white fog across the deck and someone shouting simulated emergency calls over a loudspeaker. Then they do it with live aircraft, engines running, prop wash trying to rip the goggles off your face, and you learn that the checklist isn't just about preventing mistakes, it's about creating a rhythm, a flow, a timing that turns individuals into a single organism. The color-coded jerseys are new too, or at least newly enforced. Before 1944, deck crews wore whatever they had, maybe an armband, maybe just a shouted designation, and in the confusion of a dawn launch with 50 fighters and bombers packed wingtip to wingtip, you couldn't tell who was supposed to be doing what. Now it's visual, instant, unmistakable. Yellow for aircraft directors, the choreographers of the deck, the men who guide each plane from the pack to the catapult with hand signals that must be obeyed like holy writ. Purple for the grapes, the aviation fuel handlers, whose job is so dangerous they get their own color, because if you see a purple shirt near an aircraft, you know there's AVGAS flowing and you don't smoke, you don't strike metal on metal, you don't even breathe too hard. Red for ordnance, the men who carry bombs and belts of 50 caliber ammunition and live rockets across a pitching deck where one slip could turn the ship into a floating funeral pyre. Green for maintenance, white for safety and medical, blue for tractor drivers and elevator operators. Brown for the plane captains like Maloney. It's a rainbow, but it's a rainbow that means something, a language written in cloth and sweat. They teach him about grounding. Before you pump fuel, you ground the aircraft to the deck with a copper cable, discharge any static electricity, because one spark and you're not recovering from that mistake, you're being identified by your dog tags if they can find enough of you. They teach him about segregation, fuel first, then ordnance, never both at the same time, never rush it, never assume. They teach him about the safety pins, red fabric streamers on every bomb, every rocket, every piece of ordnance that could explode, and you don't remove those pins until the final checker, the last man in the chain, the guy in the white jersey who walks the line and verifies that everything is correct before he gives the signal to the air boss in the island that the deck is hot and the launch is go. The training is relentless. They run foreign object debris walkdowns, the entire deck crew shoulder to shoulder, walking the length of the flight deck, picking up every scrap, every bolt, every piece of wire, because a single nut sucked into an engine intake at full throttle turns an aircraft into a meteor. They practice crash drills, what to do when a plane comes in too hard, lands with the gear up, catches fire on the roll. They practice man overboard drills, how to get the rescue boat in the water in 90 seconds, how to mark the spot, how to keep eyes on the swimmer even when the ship is turning into the wind for the next launch. They practice fire drills until the hoses unreel in their sleep, until the foam and water cannon crews can hit a mark from 50 feet in 15 seconds, until every man on deck knows where the nearest extinguisher is without looking. And they teach him about the cycle. The cyclic operation. This is the heart of it, the thing that changes everything. Before 1944, carrier launches were improvised, opportunistic, whenever enough planes were ready and the wind was right and the admiral felt like it. The result was inefficiency, confusion, aircraft sitting armed and fueled for hours, crews standing around, waiting, tempers fraying, mistakes multiplying. The new doctrine is different. You plan the cycle. You calculate how long it takes to bring aircraft up from the hangar deck, spot them on the flight deck, fuel them, arm them, brief the pilots, man the planes, launch them, and you do it in waves, in groups, in a predetermined sequence that maximizes the strike and minimizes the time the deck is vulnerable. A full deck load launch, every aircraft from both decks up and armed and launching in one coordinated push, is the most dangerous and most powerful thing a carrier can do, and it requires choreography so precise that there's no room for freelancing, no room for initiative, only room for training. Maloney's first real operation is Hailstone, the strike on Truk Atoll in February 1944, and he's on the USS Essex, the named ship of the class that's winning the war, and he's terrified. They brief at 0400 in the red-lit ready room below decks, and the air boss explains the launch sequence. First cycle at 0545. 32 fighters up in 18 minutes. Second cycle at 0650. 24 dive bombers and 12 torpedo bombers. Third cycle at 0755, combat air patrol and anti-submarine patrol. The clock is the enemy. If you're late, if you miss the window, the strike arrives piecemeal, the surprise is blown, the flak has time to calibrate, and men die because you couldn't get your thumbs up fast enough. He climbs the ladder to the flight deck at 0520 and the wind hits him like a fist, 30 knots over the deck plus 22 knots of the ship's speed, 52 knots of cold Pacific air that feels like it's going to rip his jersey off. The deck is in darkness, just the red and blue lights marking the edges, the yellow wands of the directors glowing in the pre-dawn murk. Aircraft are packed nose to tail, wings folded, crammed into every available inch of deck space, a jigsaw puzzle of aluminum and ordnance. His Hellcat, number 23, is third in the second row, which means he has to wait for two other aircraft to launch before they can even move his bird to the launch position, and every second of that wait is governed by the checklist, the sequence, the training. He starts his walk around at 0530, exactly when he's supposed to, flashlight in hand, checking the tidones, the control surfaces, the tires. The yellow shirt assigned to his aircraft, a guy named Henderson from Georgia, watches him with the attention of a man who knows that if Maloney misses something, Henderson's neck is on the line too. Maloney completes the check, makes eye contact, gives the thumbs up. Henderson nods, makes a note on his kneeboard, moves to the next aircraft. The pilot, a lieutenant whose name Maloney doesn't know, climbs into the cockpit at 0535. He doesn't speak. He's running his own checklist, instruments, controls, oxygen, radio, every switch and dial and gauge in the correct position. At 0540, the ship turns into the wind, and the deck starts to heave differently, a longer rhythm, the bow rising and falling through 15 feet of Pacific swell. The Yellowshirts start moving aircraft, hand signals flashing, tractors inching forward, deck crew pushing wings, a ballet of coordination that looks chaotic but is anything but. The first Hellcat taxis to the catapult, and Maloney watches the sequence, the same sequence he's drilled 100 times in training. The plane captain removes the chocks and chains. The final checker, a white shirt with sergeant stripes, walks around the aircraft one last time, checks the ordnance, the fuel cap, the control surfaces, gives his own thumbs up to the catapult officer. The pilot runs the engine up to full power, and the sound is a physical thing, a roar that vibrates your chest, and then the catapult officer drops his hand and the Hellcat accelerates from 0 to 90 miles an hour in 2 seconds, steam hissing, pistons slamming, and the plane is airborne, gear coming up, climbing into the gray dawn. 18 minutes. 32 fighters. Maloney's Hellcat is 15th in the sequence, and when Henderson gives the signal to move, he and 3 other plane captains push the Hellcat forward, guiding it around the tail of another aircraft with inches to spare, positioning it on the catapult track. The pilot throttles up. The final checker does his walk. The catapult crew hooks the holdback fitting, the device that keeps the aircraft from moving until the catapult fires. The yellow shirt raises both hands, spins them forward, the signal for full throttle. The Hellcat screams, shaking against the holdback, and the catapult officer checks his gauges, checks the wind, checks the deck, and drops his flag. The launch is violent. The aircraft slams forward, the holdback brakes as designed, and the Hellcat leaps off the bow, dips slightly as it leaves the deck, then climbs, strong and clean. Maloney exhales. 1 down. 16 to go in his part of the cycle. No mistakes. No delays. The clock says 0552, 7 minutes into the window, and they're ahead of schedule. But then the 15th aircraft, a Hellcat 2 spots behind Maloney's bird, has a problem. The pilot signals a rough engine before he even gets to the catapult. The yellow shirt signals him to shut down, and immediately the deck erupts in controlled chaos. They need to get that aircraft off the launch track out of the way without disrupting the flow. A tractor hooks up. For deck crew push. Henderson is shouting signals to the aircraft behind, repositioning, adjusting, compensating. Maloney's adrenaline spikes, because this is the moment where the old system would have collapsed, where confusion and improvisation would have cost minutes, where someone would have made a mistake trying to speed things up, but now everyone knows the procedure. The disabled Hellcat is pushed to the side, chalked and chained in the foul line area for later attention. The next aircraft moves up. The sequence continues. The delay is 38 seconds. The first cycle completes at 0603, 18 minutes on the nose. Every fighter is airborne. No crashes. No fires. No injuries. Maloney stands near the island, breathing hard, and watches the second cycle begin immediately, the dive bombers and torpedo bombers being brought up from the hangar deck on the elevator, one every 90 seconds, rolling out onto the flight deck where ordnance crews swarm them like ants, hanging 1,000-pound bombs under the wings of the Dauntless, loading torpedoes into the bellies of the Avengers. The ordnance men work with a speed that seems reckless but is actually the product of drilling, of muscle memory, of knowing that the safety pin goes here and the arming wire goes there and you check it twice and you don't touch anything else. The purple shirts move in with fuel hoses, but they wait for the ordnance crews to finish and clear, because that's the rule, that's the training, you never mix fuel and ordnance operations. When the red shirts are clear, the grapes connect the hoses, ground the aircraft, pump fuel, disconnect, coil the hoses, clear the area. The final checker walks the line. The yellow shirt signals the pilot to start engines. The smoke and noise wash over the deck, and the second cycle begins its taxi. A dive bomber halfway through the fueling process starts leaking AVGAS from a loose connection. A purple shirt sees it immediately, signals emergency, and 3 things happen simultaneously. The fueling stops. A white shirt with a fire extinguisher moves in. The yellow shirt signals the pilot to shut down the engine. The leak is a drip, not a spray, but it's on a pitching deck with hot engines nearby, and the entire sequence halts, 10 seconds, while the connection is tightened and checked and verified. Then it resumes. The system worked. The training worked. No fire. No panic. Just procedure. The second cycle launches at 0650 as planned. The third cycle, the Combat Air Patrol and ASW birds, launches at 0755. 3 cycles. 78 aircraft. Aloft and formed up and on their way to truck. And Maloney realizes, standing there in the diesel smoke and hydraulic fluid and salt spray, that he's just participated in something that would have been impossible a year ago, something that exists only because hundreds of men like him spent hundreds of hours learning to move and think and react as a single organism. The strike returns at 11:30, and the recovery is another ballet, another test. The landing signal officer, the LSO, stands on a small platform at the port stern, paddle in each hand, guiding incoming aircraft with body language and colored flags. He's the last authority, the man who says yes you're lined up or no go around, and his judgment is the difference between a successful trap and a ramp strike. The aircraft come in at 30-second intervals, hook down, throttle up in case they miss the wire, and the LSO watches each approach with the intensity of a man who knows that a wrong call kills people. The first Hellcat hits the deck hard, bounces, catches the number 2 wire, and slams to a stop in 200 feet. Deck crew swarm it immediately, a yellow shirt directing the pilot to raise the hook and add power, taxi forward, clear the landing area. The next aircraft is already turning onto final approach. They have to clear the deck in 20 seconds or wave off the next plane. The plane captain removes the chocks, the yellow shirt signals forward, the Hellcat taxis to the forward elevator, is struck below, and the deck is clear. 18 seconds. The next Hellcat traps. But then a Dauntless comes in too fast, too high, and the LSO gives the wave off, the signal to abort the landing and go around for another try. The Dauntless pilot, low on fuel, ignores it, commits to the landing, and hits the deck 30 feet long, missing all the arresting wires, skidding toward the barrier, the emergency net strung across the forward deck to stop runaway aircraft. The crash alarm sounds. Every man on deck knows the drill. Clear the area. Firefighting crews stand ready. The Dauntless hits the barrier at 40 knots, the net catches the propeller and landing gear, and the aircraft stops, folded and broken but not on fire. The pilot climbs out, shaken but alive. The crash crew has the plane off the deck in 4 minutes, dragged to the side, the barrier reset, the deck clear for the next landing. The Dauntless that was waved off comes around again, lands correctly this time, traps the 3-wire, no problem. The recovery takes 90 minutes. Every aircraft is aboard, except 2 that were lost to enemy action over the target. No deck crashes. No injuries to deck crew. The fuel crews immediately begin refueling the aircraft for the afternoon strike. The ordnance crews rearm them. The maintenance crews swarm over every bird, checking for battle damage, mechanical problems, anything that would make the aircraft unsafe for the next launch. And the cycle begins again. Maloney works through lunch, through exhaustion, through the kind of tired where your hands do the job because your brain stopped working an hour ago. He checks his Hellcat, replaces a damaged cowling panel, helps push the aircraft to the refueling area, waits for the purple shirts to finish, helps push it to the ordnance area, waits for the red shirts to hang 2 500-pound bombs and reload the ammunition cans. The final checker verifies everything. The yellow shirt spots the aircraft for the afternoon launch. And at 14:30, the cycle starts again. By the end of the truck operation, Essex has launched and recovered over 400 sorties in 3 days. The deck crew is running on coffee and adrenaline and the knowledge that they've done something extraordinary. Maloney overhears a commander in the island talking to the captain, and the commander says the word that makes it real, the word that makes the exhaustion worth it. Efficiency. The new training, the new procedures, the standardization and drilling and color coding and checklists has tripled the sortie rate and cut the accident rate by more than half. The carriers are launching faster, recovering faster, and losing fewer aircraft to deck accidents than at any point in the war. June 1944. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, which will be known to history as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, and Maloney is still on Essex, still a plane captain, but now he's a veteran, a guy who's been through the training and the real thing and understands the difference. The Japanese are sending hundreds of aircraft against the American task force, and the American response is overwhelming, a wall of Hellcats and Corsairs launched in waves so dense that they blot out the sky. The deck crew launches a full strike at 10:30, 64 aircraft in 23 minutes. Maloney's hands move through the checklist without conscious thought, muscle memory, the training become reflex. He doesn't think about where to place the chocks or how to signal the yellow shirt or when to give the thumbs up, he just does it, the way you don't think about walking or breathing, and that's the point. That's why they drilled it until it hurt, so that when the pressure is on and the clock is ticking and the admiral is screaming for more aircraft and the Japanese are 200 miles out and closing, you don't have to think, you just execute. The strike shoots down 300 enemy aircraft. The American carriers lose fewer than 30. The deck crews, working in the same choreographed rhythm, launch combat air patrol every 30 minutes, keeping a constant umbrella of fighters overhead, and when the strike returns, they recover and rearm and relaunch in under 2 hours, a feat that would have been impossible without the training, without the standardization, without the system. But the system is tested when a Hellcat comes back with the landing gear damaged by flak. The pilot radios ahead, and the LSO briefs the deck crew. This will be a belly landing. The aircraft will slide down the deck without wheels, sparks and metal and the risk of fire. The crash crew stands by, hoses charged. The ambulance, a converted jeep with a red cross on the hood, is positioned at the forward end of the flight deck. The barrier is dropped, giving the aircraft more room to slide. Every man on deck is tense, watching, ready. The Hellcat approaches, gear up, belly exposed, and the pilot does everything right, keeps the nose high, cuts the throttle at the perfect moment, and the aircraft touches down flat, belly on deck, a shriek of metal and a shower of sparks, and the plane slides, finally stopping 100 feet from the bow. No fire. The pilot pops the canopy, climbs out, and the deck crew is already there, securing the aircraft, checking for fuel leaks, for hot spots, for anything that could ignite. The medical team checks the pilot, who is uninjured, just shaking with adrenaline. The aircraft is dragged to the side. The deck is cleared in 3 minutes. The next aircraft traps. Maloney realizes that he's just watched a crash that would have killed multiple people a year ago get handled with the efficiency of a routine operation. That's the difference. That's the training. That's what tripled the survival rate. October 1944. Leyte Gulf. The largest naval battle in history, and the carriers are launching strikes around the clock, pushing the limits of men and machines. Maloney has been on deck for 16 hours straight, and he's not the only one. The entire crew is running on fumes, but the system holds. The choreography holds. The training holds. They launch a strike at 0600. Recover at 0900. Rearm and refuel. Launch at 1100. Recover at 1400. Rearm and refuel. Launch at 1630. The deck is never silent, never still, always in motion, yellow shirts signaling, purple shirts fueling, red shirts arming, green shirts fixing, white shirts checking, and plane captains like Maloney doing it all, every role blurring together in the exhaustion and the urgency. An ordnanceman, a kid from Tennessee whose name Maloney doesn't know, drops a wrench near a spinning propeller. The wrench hits the deck, bounces, and a blue shirt tractor driver sees it, stops his tractor, jumps down, picks up the wrench, and hands it back to the Tennessee kid without a word. It's a small thing, a nothing thing, except it's not, because that wrench could have been sucked into an engine or kicked into a propeller or caused a man to trip while carrying a bomb. The FOD walkdown, the training, the drills, have created a culture where everyone is watching, everyone is thinking, everyone is part of the system. A fire breaks out in a Corsair during refueling, a spark from somewhere, a leak, bad luck. The crash alarm sounds, and the response is instantaneous. The purple shirt disconnects the fuel hose. The white shirts hit the fire with extinguishers, foam, water, and the fire is out in 12 seconds. 12 seconds from alarm to all clear. The aircraft is damaged but not destroyed. The pilot, who was just climbing into the cockpit, is pulled clear, uninjured. The deck is cleared in 2 minutes. The next aircraft moves up for refueling. Maloney watches a yellow shirt director, a guy named Patterson from Texas, guide a damaged Avenger onto the elevator with one engine out and the pilot barely able to control the aircraft. Patterson's signals are calm, precise, slow, giving the pilot time to react, time to adjust, and the Avenger makes it onto the elevator, is struck below, and Patterson exhales, wipes his forehead, and signals for the next aircraft. No drama. No celebration. Just the job. That night, after the last recovery, Maloney sits on the edge of the flight deck, legs dangling over the side, watching the other carriers in the task force, their lights blinking in the darkness, and he thinks about the training, about the chiefs who yelled at him, about the drills that seemed pointless, about the checklists that felt insulting, and he understands now that all of it, every tedious repetition, every correction, every drill, was about this moment, about being able to do the impossible under pressure, about being able to save lives when everything is going wrong. The statistics will be compiled later by staff officers who never set foot on a flight deck, and the numbers will show what the men already know. In 1942 and early 1943, carrier deck accidents killed or injured an average of 5 men per carrier per month, and damaged or destroyed an average of 3 aircraft per carrier per month. By mid-1944, after the training revolution, the advanced carrier training groups, the standardization, the color-coded crews, the checklists and drills and cyclic operations, those numbers dropped to less than 1 casualty per carrier per month, and less than 1 aircraft per carrier per month. The sortie rate, the number of launches and recoveries per carrier per day, tripled. The time required to launch a full deck load dropped from over an hour to under 25 minutes. The reliability of the catapults, the arresting gear, the deck equipment, improved by orders of magnitude. But statistics don't capture what it felt like. They don't capture the smell of AVGAS mixing with salt spray, the sound of a catapult firing, the sight of a Yellowshirts' hands moving through a signal sequence, the feel of the deck heaving under your boots, the weight of responsibility when you give a thumbs up and a pilot's life depends on you being right. They don't capture the exhaustion, the fear, the pride, the camaraderie, the sense that you're part of something larger than yourself, something that matters. The men who worked the flight decks in 1944, who learned the choreography, who drilled until the procedure became instinct, who caught mistakes before they became disasters, who saved lives with checklists and hand signals and colored jerseys, those men rarely talked about it after the war. It was just a job. It was what they did. But it was a job that changed naval warfare, that made the fast carrier task force the most powerful weapon in the Pacific, that turned the tide of battles and enabled the island-hopping campaign and brought the war to Japan's doorstep. Maloney survived the war, went home to Pittsburgh, worked in a steel mill for 30 years, and never told anyone outside his family what he did on the deck of the Essex. But somewhere in his garage, in a box of old uniforms and medals he never wore, is a brown jersey with his name stenciled on the back, faded and stained with hydraulic fluid and AVGAS and sweat. And if you knew what to look for, if you understood the language of those colors, that jersey would tell you a story about training and discipline and ordinary men doing extraordinary things, about how the choreography of death became the choreography of survival, about how the change in training tripled the safe launch rate and won battles and saved lives. If you want to hear more stories like this, about the people behind the history, the small details that made the big difference, the human side of the Second World War that doesn't make it into the textbooks, hit that subscribe button and make sure you're part of this community. Drop a comment below. Tell me if you had family who served on carriers, or if there's a detail from this story you want to know more about, or what aspect of carrier operations we should cover next. Maybe the night flight ops, the kamikaze defense procedures, or what happened to the men who couldn't keep up with the pace. The next video is already in the works, and it's about something even fewer people talk about. Until then, remember the men in the colored jerseys, the plane captains and directors and fuelers and ordnance handlers, who turned chaos into choreography, who made the impossible routine, who brought pilots home alive.